Welcome. Today we will be discussing how to replace the heat sink in your computer. Now, this is the Ultra Chilltech CPU cooler, which I will be putting in my system today. It is a bit more of a high-end cooler. I've gone ahead and done some pre-installation. I've put in the temperature, the digital temperature gauge. I've just put that in, haven't connected anything, and then I took out a fan from my system because I'm going to have some clearance issues with it. But other than that, we're ready to go. Okay, this is the actual heatsink that I'll be installing. These are all the tools that you might need. You're definitely going to need whatever screwdrivers you need to get into and out of your system. I recommend Q-tips and rubbing alcohol for actually cleaning your old processor, to clean the old thermal paste off of. Also a microfiber cloth, and then obviously some more thermal paste. And then I will be using a 3.5, just a normal index card to actually spread the paste so that you don't touch it and get a good solid coverage. Now, I recommend you begin by disconnecting your power supply. Now I pulled it off to the side just to give me more room to move my hands in here, but I left it plugged into everything else. The first step should be to disconnect the power from your old heatsink and making sure that's clear of the motherboard so that you don't have to worry about that. Okay. Now once you have disconnected it, for this type of heatsink, this swing arm unhinges or takes the tension off of the bars and allows you with a little bit of wiggling to actually free up the heatsink, at which point it just comes free. And at this point you are done with your old heatsink. These are the materials I will be using to clean the old thermal paste off of the processor. I recommend the isopropyl alcohol because it will not affect the circuitry in your machine, and also because it evaporates cleanly and fast, and it won't leave much of a residue behind. Also, these Q-tips make wonderful tools because they allow you to get into the small spaces and to scrub the way you may need to get the thermal paste off. The microfiber tissue will also make a good last cleaning run to make sure that you don't leave anything behind. Okay, so this is near the end of me cleaning the old processor off. This is just the wet end of a Q-tip, and I'm going back and forth between it and the dry end and going through multiple Q-tips, making sure to get as much of the old residue off as I can. And once we get all of the old residue off, just that microfiber cloth to make sure you leave none of the cotton behind from the Q-tip. Make sure you've gotten all the edges and you're good and clean. There are many opinions about the proper way of applying the thermal compound to a product. However, the easiest I have found by far is to apply about a pea-sized quantity to the center of the processor. And of course you may have to add as you go. But after you've applied it, use either a business card or just a 3x5 card and spread it and get a good solid coverage over the entire processor. Now you're obviously not being too exacting with this, and I'll definitely need to clean up with a Q-tip afterwards, but just adjusting this so that you have a good thin coverage over the entirety of the processor. Okay, so obviously I had to remove the another chip to give myself some room to get to work in here. There are a lot of arguments about how much thermal paste to put on and how to make sure that you have a good connection. But the biggest thing that I've seen out there is that if you remove the processor from the heatsink, if you separate them after you've made the initial connection, you run a strong risk of trapping air between the two pieces of hardware, which can lead to a failure to transmit the heat properly, which is the entire purpose of this piece of equipment. So I find it best to make the initial connection and then just keep a solid, steady pressure on and make sure that you screw everything down evenly. At this stage, before we start putting all the chips back in and putting the power supply back, you want to run the wiring. There will be a wire that needs to connect to the motherboard to tell the heatsink when it needs to be kicking on and going into higher gear. And then for this one, there are a couple other power components and connectors to connect the power and connect the heatsink to the display to show that to monitor the temperature. Once you've finished connecting the wiring for your new heatsink, go ahead and reattach your power supply and bolt it back into place, and then you're done. You can go ahead and reconnect or reattach the cover for your case, clean up your area, and rewire it. There should be no driver installation, no special work necessary. Just plug and play. And with that, you've installed a heatsink.